Hello and welcome to Aliens Revealed Live. I'm your host, Dean Caparella, here on the Paranormal UK radio network. From alien abductions to monster-infested ranches to men in black, near-death experiences, close encounter experiences and more, we speak to some of the most amazing people on the planet, ready and willing to share their chilling stories with you. And they all come from the Aliens Revealed Live files here on the Paranormal UK radio network. Well, UFO debunkers were a dime a dozen not too long ago, but while they are still lurking in the shadows, ready to poo-poo any evidence that UFOs are real, they don't seem to be as vocal as they once were. That's the perception of many ufologists today, but under no circumstances have they dropped their guard. More evidence over the past few years, considered to have come from reputable sources, has watered down the arguments made by UFO debunkers to some degree. It's almost a case today of the Skeptic Society being the ones who have to come up with the proof that UFOs and aliens are real. The recent UAP report to Congress has given the ufology community more credibility. Not that they didn't have it, but after many years of attacks from UFO skeptics, there's a lot of damage that's had to be repaired. The good news is that the alien truth that has been touted for so long by the UFO community is starting to receive more vindication as each day goes by. Legendary researcher Stanton Friedman had a long-running battle with the skeptics, but according to world-renowned researcher Grant Cameron, he loved the fight. Friedman's ongoing battles with master UFO debunker Philip Klass are now part of ufology folklore. Friedman never backed away from a fight, or more to the point, baseless skepticism which he knew he could defeat. In fact, during the Aliens Revealed Live online summit, Cameron said Friedman had two favourite projects, the MJ-12 document and debunking skeptics. Stanton Friedman battled with the skeptics for several decades. Cameron was amazed at his energy and ability to stay focused on the end prize despite everything that was going on around him. Cameron says Friedman's workload was something that he himself would struggle with. He was not only able to complete his commitments on the road, but would also work on other projects he had running, including his frequent stoushes with Philip Klass. Stanton T. Friedman passed away on May 13, 2019, but has left a huge legacy and paved the way for other ufologists to follow. Do UFO debunkers miss him? Not sure about that, but the ufology community is certainly poorer without him. Friedman also left a whole lot of research documents that he gathered over 61 years, and Grant Cameron has spent much of his recent time delving through Friedman's massive arsenal of research. Grant Cameron is joining us now. How are you, Grant?
Just fantastic. Thanks for your interest in what I'm working on.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about Stanton Friedman today, the legendary researcher. Sadly passed away in May and left a huge legacy, and part of that legacy is a whole lot of research documents that he gathered over 61 years. So how many documents are we actually talking about?
I don't think anybody really has any idea. I looked through the first part of the collection that they had 22 archives boxes. That was only the stuff that they had in files in filing cabinets. The vast majority of the collection, maybe 90%, was never in files. It was in sort of piles of material all over the place. I photographed 6,000 pages of material, which would have been about maybe half of what was there, because he had a lot of stuff on. He worked in the 1980s as a physicist in Canada. He had a job, so there's a lot of that had to do with different physics jobs that he had, which had nothing to do with UFOs. So I was 6,000 pages, probably of 12,000 pages that I reviewed. The archivist, it told me 2 years. Now she's telling another researcher as much as 4 years, but 3 full-time archivists to put it all together.
Wow. Gee,
massive collection. The biggest, yeah, definitely the biggest UFO collection of all times.
Okay. So was there anything in particular that you were really interested in finding?
The material I was interested in finding when I went there was two things. As you know, or maybe you don't know, Stan was very much involved in the MJ-12 document in the 1980s. And I was researching at the same time, and I was interacting with Governor Bill Moore, who was on a team with Stanton Friedman and Jamie Chandray in the 1980s. And Stan maintained that the MJ-12 document was for real. I maintained it was a made-up document, but the MJ-12 was real, but the document was not real. There was actually 3,700 pages of MJ-12 documents that were released in the 80s and the 90s. So I was very interested in that, but I was interested in the back correspondence between Stanton Friedman, Bill Moore, Jamie Chandray, what was going on in the background. That was one of the things I spent a lot of time on. The other thing I was spending, I looked for and did find, and that is a case that I knew in late 1970s. I knew Stan was involved in, and that case involved a scramble of jets out of Cuba for a UFO that the National Security Agency had picked up the communications, and that file I did find. Although the part of that file is missing because it appears that Stan did all this stuff by phone. And what I got an indication from Joanna, who is the archivist, is that a lot of Stan's phone calls were taped. So that is being processed, and I'll be going back to try to find, did Stan tape these phone calls about this Cuban jet intercept in 1967?
Yeah, I've always been wondering what's going to happen to all the files, given Stan's reputation. And do you think there's any danger that with the stuff he fought to expose, that there might be some unscrupulous people behind the scenes that would want to swoop in and grab those files?
Well, good luck. I mean, it's a massive collection. I mean, they would have to, I mean, if you've been in an archives, you realize that you have to sign out for the boxes. There was a couple of things that popped up that I told them to protect. One was and this happens with a lot of researchers, that you get a lot of material that comes to you and you basically don't have time to do it. It's not that you're not interested in the story, but you're just so busy with other stuff. You just stick it in a file. And the one thing that Stan did get was somebody had sent him a piece of the Roswell crash. And it said, this is the piece from Roswell that I promised I would give you. And they just had it in a file. They had just had it. And I told them, you better protect that piece of metal. And so they've got, I think, 6 different items at the present time. You got to remember, they're still processing this stuff. It'll take years to do. But where you need an actual archivist to actually go in the box with you to see this material. So that's the one thing that they had. The other thing that I think they're protecting is a photograph that was sent to Stan in 1984 from a cameraman from a TV studio who photographed these cows out in a field and these 7 UFOs over top of the cows. And that kind of stuff, I've sort of given them the instruction, because you got to realize the archives that this is in is not a UFO archives. They are provincial archives, almost like you would have a state archives where your birth certificates are held, death certificates, property sales, stuff like that. This is the first time they've ever done any sort of collection like this. And the archivist told me that she actually had to sort of fight to get this into the archives, because it's a lot of money. You consider 4 full-time archivists for 4 years. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so that's not their type of collection. And the other thing is that Stan was not a Canadian citizen. So there was sort of a backlash as to why should we process some guy who was essentially an American. But he was so famous in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where this is happening, that they got it. So they're not putting this stuff online. In order to actually see the files, you have to go to the archives. You have to request a box. So you would have to know where the material is in the box. And as with all archives, you're not allowed to bring any paper in with you. You're not allowed to bring a pen in with you. There are a lot of, restrictions inside an archives to protect documents, as there is at the National Archives and the presidential libraries. It's all the same thing. It's very hard to get stuff into the archives or out of the archives.
So given Stan's great reputation, was there any danger that those that he fought to expose would be the ones who might come in and swoop on his collection?
Okay, in terms of grabbing the material, there's a couple of things I don't think that will happen, and that is that the collection is very big. I don't think there's really anything that's going to be really detrimental in terms of proving that there's a UFO cover-up. And it's very hard inside an archives to actually move material out. You have to sign for boxes. They have video security. You're not allowed to bring a pen in. You're not allowed to bring a suitcase in or anything like that. So it's pretty restrictive in terms of that kind of stuff. There was a couple of items that I did mention to the archivist that they should protect. One was a letter that someone had sent to him that claimed to have a piece from the Roswell crash. And Stan, it appeared, had not done anything with it. He had just put this in a file. And so I said, that kind of stuff, you should gather that. And so there are, I think, 6 different items inside the archives that in order to see them, you need an archives person to be sitting there with you when you handle the material. So that kind of stuff. I don't think there's really anything major that I discovered that wouldn't, that people would be able to get. And it's still going to take years to do. I don't think Stan really had the smoking gun evidence, if that's what people are looking for.
As a world-renowned researcher yourself, Grant, going through Stan's work, was anything he did different to what you do? Was there a lot of similarities or not much at all?
Well, the one weird similarity was this idea that the archivist has stated that he was more of a piler than a filer. And he had 3 rooms full of stacked paper to the ceiling. And that a lot of stuff wasn't filed. And I noticed myself as well that you get sort of overwhelmed with the number of subjects you're working on. And I suddenly realized I had these stacks starting to pile up around the room. So that was one thing that was similar. I think in terms of what he was doing, it was basically like any other researcher. So people, would put me the question like, well, did you find any pay slips from the CIA? All this kind of stuff. Was he a double agent? Was he working for the government and stuff? And I go, no, when I look at it, he's just like any other researcher, was going after the same sort of subjects, was making the same phone calls. Basically, I don't think very much different. It's just he had done it for 61 years, and he was the type of guy who didn't throw anything out, which I'm sort of like that as well. In fact, the archives at one point came to me with these little slips of paper, and she said, "Would you want me to, do I throw this stuff out?" And I said, "No, put it all in one box." And that was the old idea. When you're a researcher, you put somebody's name on a piece of paper or a couple of ideas on a piece of paper. And there was like literally piles and piles and piles of these little pieces of paper. And I said, I would actually go through these little pieces of paper to look to see if there was something on there that rang a bell. But that was the kind of thing that I noticed. It was just massive amounts of material. And even though he was more focused on the research he was doing, he only had certain subjects he was interested in. The problem with him is the same as the problem I have, is that if you sort of get any reputation as being sort of a lead researcher or something like that, everybody asks you about everything. So Stan, even though he didn't work on the alien autopsy or the Lazar thing, he would get questions, and then he would have to know about everything, because he had the vast majority of the collection, I think, is letters from people, ordinary people on the street writing to him about certain subjects. And Stan would take the time and he would actually write back to people and this sort of thing. So there's a lot of files on a lot of different subjects. And I found that very interesting, that I'm in the same sort of situation where people will write you, and it's not that the subject isn't interesting. It's just you don't have time to do everybody's story. Everybody thinks that you're going to research their story and do a book. So there were a lot of weird stories in the Stanton Friedman files that Stan never did investigate. But he did have a lot of big investigations that he did. And the prime examples were the MJ-12. He spent a lot of time on that. The skeptics, Stan would fight with every skeptic that came along, debate them and stuff, which I don't do. I don't get into that. And the other thing he had was the Area 51 thing with the Bob Lazar thing. There were literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of material on that. He did a real deep dive investigation. He had the court file papers when the pandering charge came up, all these different things. He had done all the background stuff. And it was pretty impressive, the amount of material that he had. Even though I would disagree with his assumption as to what happened at Area 51, it was really impressive to see these collections where he actually went after something. He was very meticulous. He would do a lot of phone calls, a lot of research, and he knew how to do it. He's a very good researcher.
Yeah. So you've mentioned some of the projects he was working on, but did he have a favorite? Was there something that he really wanted to sink his teeth into?
Well, I guess the favorite was the MJ-12. That was the concept where the idea is there's a group of guys that are in control of the whole thing, sort of like this, the cabal that's running the whole show. And Stan got involved. It was actually kind of weird, because this is the background stuff I was looking for. Is this document was leaked in 1984. It was first, the MJ-12 word was starting to be leaked out in about 1980. And I've always said it's a slow drip disclosure, that they're putting out material and using plausible deniability. So they alter documents, they put it out where they can say these documents are phony, and they're putting it out. Now, the big MJ12 document, which I guess Stan probably spent his whole career trying to defend himself because people figured he had been taken, and he was defending this document as being real, came out in December of 1984. But Stan actually did not see the document until it was actually made public in about May of 1987. So there was 3 years where he didn't see that document. And the thing was, he was asking for this document, but Bill Moore was saying to him, well, it's too unsafe to send you the document. You got to remember, this is before email. This is snail mail stuff, and he didn't want to send Stan this document. So the weird thing was, this document that Stan basically, I think, spent the vast majority of his time defending, that he was right about the MJ12 and the document was real. He didn't really see the document until it was too late, where he got stuck in it and he was defending it. I would say that was what he spent most of his time on. And the other thing was basically fighting with skeptics. So the famous Phil Klass from the Aviation Week in Space Technology, there is literally hundreds of pages of correspondence, snail mail correspondence going back and forth, where these guys are arguing about various subjects and like that. So those were the two main things that I think Stan was basically working on, was the skeptic thing of trying to hammer on people who really didn't know what they were talking about, and that the flying saucers did exist. If you actually looked at the evidence and didn't ignore it, it was for real. And the fact that there was a control group that was running the whole show. But there, I think he sort of got backed into that corner where he had to defend the document and protect his reputation, whereas the vast majority of people believe the document was not real.
Yeah, I think it's more a case of trying to prove that the flying saucers aren't real. I mean, there's so much evidence that coming up with evidence that they aren't real is the tough thing. But the difference between skeptics and debunkers, I don't mind skeptics. Debunkers are what annoy me.
Yeah, Stan actually had some really interesting stuff. I've been doing some PowerPoint presentations where I go through some of the documents that I found, and he actually had little things that you'd hear in his lectures all the time. He had these little rules about, skeptics, don't bother me with the evidence. My mind is already made up. And all these little anecdotes that he had that have become famous because he used them almost every lecture. And when you look at what he was saying, it was actually the fact that the vast majority of people who went up against Stanton Friedman, whether it was Carl Sagan or whether it was Phil Klass or James Oberg or these people, it was really true, because I had run up against these guys as well. And the fact is, they really don't read the evidence. They basically, it's like a rational argument where I'm smart enough, I can just sort of wing it. I don't really need to see the evidence. It's just very common that this is not going to be real or whatever. But Stan, there's just massive amounts of time that he spent arguing with these people, debating these people at Oxford and different universities. And that sort of tied into Stan's life. When you look at the material he did, I show some of the itineraries of Stan's travel. It was unbelievable. And he was making some pretty good money. He was doing universities, which is a pretty high-end money thing. But his itinerary would be like 2 lectures on this day, fly to this city, do another lecture, fly to this city. And he was doing this for like decades and decades. I was stunned, because I know I can go on the road, I can do 2 lectures, and after that it's like, oh man, get me home. It's like I could not believe the amount of material that he produced, and in light of the fact that he was traveling most of the time. He would say to people, he would say, this is my job. I've got to pay for my family, I got to pay the bills and stuff like that. So he did it full time. But it was amazing, because I know when I'm on the road, I don't really get a lot of stuff done, but Stan was able to meticulously work at stuff, answer phone calls, go through all this material. I was pretty impressed with what I saw, even though it was very unorganized, that he'd sort of lost control of the files after a while, that there was just so much material that he was no longer filing this stuff. He was just sort of stacking it. And yet, I guess he would know where it was. I've run up against it, because I used to run buildings at the university, and I ran up against professors that were like that, who had, everything. You couldn't move in their office. That's what apparently was Stan's, that you could go into any of the 3 rooms and you could not move in the room. You could literally not turn around. There was that much material in the room. But yet he would know where everything was. And that was pretty amazing, that he was able to pull this material, because I didn't know until the archives pointed out the fact that almost none of the stuff was in files.
Yeah, there's no doubt about his passion. One more on Stan Grant. How did he get on with other researchers? Did he have people that he confided in?
Yes, that was kind of, he would never really publicly go against other researchers. He was very much against Bob Lazar. He would mostly fight with the skeptics. He would always do the gray basket thing. If it was a controversial subject where he really didn't agree with someone, he would say, okay, that's in my gray basket. It's not a white basket or black, it's a gray basket, to sort of avoid the controversy. So he really didn't fight with a lot of researchers. He just fought with the skeptics who were outside the field. And a lot of times we'd be in situations where there would be panels and stuff, and you'd get into the secret space program, and Stan would just sit there very quietly and not say anything. So I was pretty good in that way of not criticizing other researchers or getting into fights with other researchers, unless it was the Area 51 thing, which he was really upset about, that people were backing that. And the alien autopsy, he was very much against the alien autopsy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just now changing tact, talk about disclosure. So as far as disclosure is concerned, are we basically being led up the garden path?
Well, we're being led, that's for sure. I believe it's a slow drip disclosure. Now everybody's gotten all religious about, To the Stars Academy and Kit Green and Hal Puthoff and John Alexander and all of these names. I was talking about these guys in the 1980s, late 1980s. I was saying these guys know what they're talking about. These are guys who had at some point in their career come up against the UFO phenomena. The prime example would be Kit Green. Kit Green ran the Weird Desk at the CIA. He was the head of life sciences for the CIA. And he was very much interested in the alien autopsy. So he knew a lot of stuff about UFOs, but he could never get read into the alien autopsy. Mm-hmm. So he was basically, that's the thing, these guys would interact with each other. They all had security clearances, and they would talk to each other, and we called them the Avery. Now they're called the Cosmic Club or the Invisible College. Or they have all these different names for these guys who are quietly in the background. Nobody knows they're working on it, but they're talking to other people. So yeah, there's a disclosure. What I've sort of changed my opinion in the last couple of years is, and this is based upon watching what these very high level guys are saying, I don't really think the government has what people think they do. I used to think, they had it. There was one story that already started back in 1987. The three of the top guys, Jacques Vallée, Kit Green, and Hal Puthoff. Now, Kit Green and Hal Puthoff have perhaps the longest held top secret SCI clearances in the United States, along with Jacques Vallée, who's a prominent researcher, get together at a Denny's restaurant in 1987, and they're looking at, what can we believe in the UFO phenomena? What's real? There's all this garbage floating around. What do we know for sure? And what they came up with was called the core story. We are being interacted by some sort of intelligence, whatever it is, ET, whatever it is. Number two, there's been a crash, and we have some material. We have at least one body, and we have some craft, but we haven't back engineered anything. It's so far beyond us. So you have these stories about, the deep state, and they've got ships going to other planets and stuff. What I've come to conclusion after 45 years is they don't have any of that stuff. Yes, they have one body at least. They have a craft intact. They have they have films that they know are UFO stuff, but in terms of figuring it out, they haven't got a clue. And that's what Kit Green said, who's now famously tied into To the Stars. He said 12 years ago, he said, Uncle Sam and the intelligence committee are clueless, and there are intelligence people playing bad games. So that would be my conclusion is, yes, they're leading us. And I think the disclosure may have actually happened. You see Donald Trump, this whole thing with Donald Trump's comment where the Navy goes in and briefs the president. So they show him the videos, the Nimitz. Yes, Nimitz happened. There was a UFO sighting. Big deal. It was a UFO sighting. They show him the videos. And they say, Mr. President, these videos are real. These are unidentified. And then Trump, as he publicly stated, said, I don't know. I don't know if it's really I don't know if I believe in extraterrestrials. And that's where I think they are. That you have a situation where, yes, the phenomena is real, but in terms of where it's going, that's where I get into the consciousness thing, where in 2012, I shifted gears, realized I was on the wrong train, and realized that consciousness is a key part of this thing. So if you hear people in the government talking about nuts and bolts, free energy, they haven't got a clue. If you go to Tom DeLonge's initial, if you follow his story, his initial interview where he tells how this thing happened, he was in a Lockheed skiff before they started giving him all these people to work with, he's talking to the head scientist at Lockheed, and the head scientist said, I just want to know how they get here. How does it work? How does this thing work? And he said, yeah, he says a bunch of stuff. And the guy said, yeah, it's cool. Okay, what else? I think consciousness is involved.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom DeLonge said, the head scientist at Lockheed, who's always rumored to be the back engineering company with the flying saucers, says, now you're talking. And he said he wouldn't shut up for 45 minutes. That's all he wanted to talk about. So if a person is talking about ETs, aliens, nuts and bolts, and they don't talk about consciousness, I don't think they have a clue. And what you hear in the UFO community and in the military is this idea of evil aliens, we're going to shoot them down, all this kind of stuff. I think, no, it's way beyond that. As Jan Hartson was told when he asked Ben Rich at Lockheed Skunk Works, he said, how do they get here? And Ben said, what do you know about ESP? And Jan said, means everything in time and space is connected? He said, yeah, that's how it works. And we chased around the former president of Penn State University, had 14 honorary doctorate degrees, was the head of the Defense Science Board, the co-developer of the homing torpedo, president of Penn State for 15 years. And he told us as well, he said, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. And the Canadian government in 1950 were told in a top secret memo by the Americans that mental phenomena was involved. So that would be my conclusion. Yes, we are being led. They are telling us this thing's for real. Even Jim Semivan, who's the co-director of To the Stars, was asked, is this green-lighted by the Pentagon? And he said, well, of course it's being green-lighted by the Pentagon. Most of the people in the UFO community don't think that. They think that there's, Tom DeLonge and these people have all sort of broken away and stuff. No, this is a slow drip disclosure by whoever controls the message. But what they're looking for is more research money, because the vast majority of the military is really not interested. It's not in their sort of scope of things to do. And we haven't really worked on the problem. And it's so far advanced that they're trying to get money through Congress to do some research. But I would bet everything that I know that they really don't know much beyond the fact that this is for real. And it involves stuff that can come into the physical world, crash. But in terms of understanding, I don't think they have a clue as to what's going on.
Yeah, and consciousness, of course, is very huge at the moment. It seems like we're at the mercy of an ET playbook. I mean, it seems every decade we get dripped something new, and it's got to the stage now where consciousness is what we're being told.
Yeah, that's my point I always make. I say, because people always want to know about disclosure. So I say, here's the situation. The government is not covering up, because if the government were to cover up, they would do what happens here in Canada. Since 1967, the Canadian government has not talked about the subject. And so people ask me, well, you're in Canada, what is the government doing? And I go, I haven't got the foggiest notion, because they never talk about it. If you want to cover up, you shut up and quit talking about it. You don't leak documents. You don't put people out with stories and stuff like that. So they're not covering up, but they're also not disclosing, because if they wanted to disclose, they would stand the CIA director up or the president and would say, here's the situation, here's the story. So they're not doing that. They're doing something in between. There's no doubt the government is doing something in between covering up and disclosing. But the aliens, or whoever they are doing exactly the same thing. If they wanted to tell us what's going on, they would land on the White House lawn and tell us what's going on. They're not doing that, but they're not covering up. Because I do a lecture called The Theory of Wow, where I go through all the different phenomena. And for example, let's give you one. Why do UFOs have lights on them? So you can see them. We don't have lights on our craft. Why do they have lights? They want you to see the craft. They want you to go, wow, what's going on here? And make you think. And they do the same with crop circles or cattle mutilations. Why are cattle mutilations bloodless? Because if they weren't bloodless, nobody would pay any attention to them. They make it really, really weird. So there is this idea that we are sort of being led by the intelligence. And all you have to do is go back to 1890s and look at the airships of the 1890s, and there was thousands of them. And what did we have? We had wooden ships with propellers and guys hanging off of ropes and stuff like that. It is completely changed. And what I say is, people will describe, for example, Stan spent a lot of time talking about the 4,000 landing trace cases. They said, this is physical evidence. Look, landing traces. It lands, it burns the ground, and leaves the tripod marks. That has not happened for 20 years. That has stopped. Now we got crop circles. And it's almost like they're turning the pages of a book, and we're watching. And they do this, and they do this, and they're just leading us, almost like they've done this 1,000 different planets. They're leading us through this process of waking us up. And that's where this theory of wow thing comes from, is they do things that are so bizarre that you just go like, what is going, and it makes you cannot deny it. And I'll just give you an example. This only happened last week. I gave a lecture in Laughlin, Nevada, and I give a lecture on what are called manifestations on apports. This happens around physical mediums. It happens around most experiencers. If you ask them, do you ever anything fly around the house or things that appear and disappear and end up in the freezer and stuff like that? They'll go, yeah, all the time. And so I was doing a lecture on this. So I do this PowerPoint lecture in Laughlin, Nevada last week. And basically, when I went to load the presentation onto the computer in the conference room, there was 10 things that happened to my presentation that are impossible. There's absolutely no way.
Wow.
They had sides were flipped sideways. There was double slides, triple slides. The slides were all pulled and elongated. Slides where I had embedded the slide, the audio had moved to other slides. There was 10 things that were absolutely impossible. The problem is that people don't do PowerPoint, so they really don't realize how weird this was. I was absolutely floored when I said that. And I went and reloaded it again. I reloaded it a third time. Every time it did the same thing. So you see these really weird sort of things where we're sort of being led by whatever it is, and I'm not sure it's ET anymore. Whatever it is, we are being led towards an end result, which may be another couple hundred years for us to get through. Because I think even in the UFO community, most people are sort of clued out on the outside. Nobody cares. They don't really care about this. It's kind of an interesting story. Tell me a weird story about UFOs. But beyond that, really people don't realize that if you understand what's going on with this subject and what's behind it, this is the Super Bowl of all stories. It talks about how does reality actually work. And when you see people talking about nuts and bolts and aliens and stuff like that, you realize they are not at that level. That they're still in the level of tell me a good story, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So we really need to be listening to the CE5 experiences.
Absolutely. That's what I say. I say, and I maintain this, and the UFO community still doesn't want to go down that road. But I say, if you want to know what's actually going on, you cannot, the photographs simply tell you, yeah, there's something weird. Yeah, that's probably not ours. Or crop circles or whatever it is. It says, yeah, it's probably not made on Earth, or the metals. Everybody's now chasing these stupid pieces of metal to believe that a flying saucer comes across the galaxy and then little pieces start falling off, when in fact they're just dropping these pieces to make you think. So we get into this situation where people are in this sort of a loop where they are caught up in stories. And I say, if you want to know what's actually going on, you have to. The only thing you need to deal with is the people who are interacting with the phenomena. And there are a lot of them who will tell you, they won't cover it up. They'll tell you, okay, this is what they told me. And what you get is these unbelievable patterns that we have to follow. 40% of all experiencers say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. 42% of all experiencers say they have mathematical, scientific, or technical material in their head that they did not learn in school. And I basically say to people, are you crazy? I mean, if you're in a room, or say in a university building, and you see Physics 101, Chemistry 101, and then you see a room that says everything in the universe, why would you not try to pick the lock or get in there and hack that intelligence? But most people will say, oh, it's anecdotal. They just believe they're getting these messages. And I say, well, yeah, it's all anecdotal. It's all belief. I agree. You believe whatever you believe. It's all belief. But if somebody says, I knew the answer to everything in the universe, I think you're absolutely insane not to go down that road and to try to see if you can hack into that stuff. Because basically it appears to show that all the answers are there, and that these people, whether you're a psychic, a medium, a channeler, or a person having an ET experience, that you are transported and put into this field, almost like being in an ocean where you're in the dark, and then suddenly you're levitated up towards the surface where there's more light and you can see what's going on. And to me, it's like it's a no-brainer that is where you've got to go. But the vast majority of the UFO community is not interested in that. They're interested in stories. They're interested in hardware. Give me the free energy and then get lost. We want toys. We want all this kind of stuff. And they really don't see the point of what's really going on here, which is, I always going to say, it's going to be much less physical than people think it is. It's going to be much more spiritual than people think it is. And a lot of people aren't going to be very happy with that end result. Yeah.
And just one more before we close it out. I mean, we talk about the CE5 experiences, and every time they've spoken to me, they talk about the download they get. So going back through history, I mean, some of the brilliant people through history, Tesla, Einstein, these guys, I mean, do you think these guys took advantage of what they were given?
Yeah, I wrote a book. I wrote a book called Inspired: The Paranormal World of Creativity. And I go through 13 Nobel Prize winners. I go through musicians. And I did a second book. I got a message from supposedly an alien, the Guardians, who sent me a message that said, we want you to know the messages in the music. And I had no musical background whatsoever. But I wrote a whole book on where does music come from. And the whole thing of creativity is I go through inventions. And I say, you think that people invented this stuff? Go back and look at Einstein, who said he had the dream of the toboggan. And he said, I knew I had to understand that dream. In fact, you could say, and I would say, that my entire career was based on a meditation on that dream. And the quantum atom came to Bohr in a dream where he's being at a racetrack and they're showing him how the horses move from track to track, the quantum atom. And there was just so many inventions that you think that they got it. And you go back and you find out, no, it was a download. And that's how it would change my mind is in 2012, I'm in the nuts and bolts. I'm chasing the presidents. I'm trying to get the answer. And I have a download experience that happens instantaneously and is now more accurately called a noetic experience, where it comes with absolute certainty. You know it's knowledge. This is not just a good idea. It makes total sense. It's like you become enthralled. And then I had a second one in about 2017, very complex noetic experience where I was told all sorts of things, like giving me the idea, is the world made out of nuts and bolts? If it is, that's one world. But if it's made out of consciousness, that's a whole different world. If it's one life, that's one world. But if it's multiple lives, that's another world. Is it random? If it's random, that's one world. But if it's pattern, that's a different world. And these ideas are coming in my head, and I'm madly trying to copy this stuff down, and it's freezing cold, and I'm writing this stuff on a piece of paper. That's the kind of thing that I had the experience, and I was changed because of experience. Most people are changed by experience, not by somebody arguing with them. And once you have the experience, when you have these download experiences, that's when I started to get into this thing. And I realized like how many songs came in dreams is unbelievable. Yeah. And how many inventions came in dreams, or the how many things where an inventor is working on a problem and working on it. Now we know how you do this. Work, and then you go and you sit on a park bench. So the hologram and the laser were both invented that same way. The guy was working on the problem, he couldn't figure it out, and he goes and he's sitting on a park bench watching someone play tennis, and all of a sudden, boom, the idea comes to his head. He goes running back to the lab, writes it down. Or I'll give you the last example. Gary Nolan, who is he's the geneticist with To the Stars. He's doing this genetic experiment with experiencers to see is there a different brain pattern, checking their DNA and stuff like that. He's at Stanford University, and people figure he may be up for a Nobel Prize. He says, I don't know how it works. I don't know if there's little elves in your head. He said, I don't know how it works, but I know how to make it work. And he says, I sit down and I go through the problem and I analyze it and I work all the stuff and I put the questions beside the bed at night and I get up in the morning and the ideas are in my head.
Wow.
That's how it works. And you can see that we can start to do that. And that's when you start making headway, when you start listening to these people, that they're describing a process. And it's a matter of hacking that process and to get it to work. That if these guys can do it, you can get answers to very complex problems. And that in the history, it is shown that a lot of the answers we already have come in exactly that method.
Okay. All right, so that's just about it. Time's up. But just wanted to mention the book, Managing Magic, the Government's UFO Disclosure Plan, available Amazon, all good bookstores, online?
Yeah, it's there. And I have about 7 new books coming on, ports and all sorts of new weird stuff. But Managing Magic was the one that talks about the gradual disclosure plan. And usually Amazon is the place you get it with the Kindle or whatever.
Fantastic. Grant, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's leading researcher Grant Cameron. The topic of near-death experiences, or NDEs, has become a hot subject in recent years as more people reveal their experiences after dying. While death may not seem such a savoury topic to discuss at the best of times, the truth about what really happens when we die is fast changing people's perspectives about it.
What I describe in most of my near-death is that it wasn't that I was hearing it, I was it.
Right.
I was the energy of the popping. I was the energy of the sensation of pressure. I was the energy of all of it. Whatever was being experienced, I wasn't separate from that. So the sensation of an upward pull and cracking and this thrusting, if you will, into this next area that was just darkness. There was no fear about it. There was no, oh my gosh, I'm in purgatory or I'm in hell or what's going on. None of that was going on. In fact, there was no direct correlation with what seemed to be the experience and the identity of Kelly, which is why I now refer to myself as the story of Kelly, because there's real knowing that they are very much two separate things.
Right.
Again, don't know the amount of time that was spent in this darkness. I just remember feeling a tremendous amount of love. I felt held. I wasn't a body. There was no concern for what was apparently going on with the other thing, the entity of Kelly. There was no concern about this being where I might be stuck. I just felt held and loved.
Did you feel any presence?
Not in that darkness, no. And I will say why I think that is, because I truly believe that's where I was part of what I refer to as nothingness or everythingness. So there's nothing separate there.
Right.
Why there's just this permeation of complete and utter love. So I would describe that to me in my mind as the most beautiful connection to a God source or a God energy or a universe energy, whatever you refer to it as, the everythingness or nothingness.
Yeah.
No duality at all. There's no separation at all. There's just an experience and not even an experiencer. So again, no correlation or connection to understanding what amount of time was spent there. And the next recollection I had was this thrusting, popping energy again, and this sensation of pulling up. No body to be pulling, just this awareness of all of this. And again, I was it. And then just this beautiful, what I describe as a baby pink, and it's a color we just do not have here. Everything that I point to, that I speak of, I have to use language to point to it.
That's Kelly Sammy, who had her NDE in February of 2008. She joins us on our next episode of Aliens Revealed Live Files. Thanks for being with us. Don't forget to check out our site at arlhub.com. That's arlhub.com. And as always, keep looking upwards and take care.